What's going on, YouTube? Storm here, coming at you guys in another video today. Today I'll be talking a little bit, kind of a short and simple video. We'll be talking about 5 cards I think you guys should go ahead and grab while they're relatively inexpensive, and you guys can, possibly hang on to them, maybe make a little money, or heck, maybe you intend to use these cards. A lot of these cards on this list are thinking ahead and assuming probably we will have a more pendulum-based format come, Extreme Forces, assuming, of course, we get a ban list, spirals are hit in some form or fashion. So that's a lot of these cards I'm suggesting are, looking towards the future and kind of making that assumption. So anyway, we'll go ahead and move to the first card, which is Abyss Actor Curtain Raiser. So this card is used in a lot of the different pendulum decks that are going to be coming when we get Heavily Metal Foes Electrum in Extreme Force, and it's a really strong card. So if you're unfamiliar with the card does, its monster effect isn't really used in Magicians or in outside of maybe Abyss Act. Main thing is your pendulum effect. If you don't have any monsters out, you can special summon it from your pendulum zone, but it does have a hard once per duel effect. So this doesn't necessarily think you're locked into, because typically this is played anywhere from 2 to 3 in a lot of the decks that are designed to go into Heavy Metal Foes Electrum to kind of kickstart their plays. And it's just a free body to get on board so you can get your Electrum out. It's probably one of the better, and it is a hard one. It's once per duel, but it's not one of those cards that's necessarily bad to draw multiples of, And I think it's a card that's very relatively cheap right now, and it's an ultra rare in the battle. I think it's a Battles of Legends, so you can attain it, and it's 7 scale is definitely not bad. Definitely a card I would pick up, a playset of, just in case if you plan on playing any kind of pendulum-based deck, because it is a pretty decent card in general, and it's probably likely to kind of maybe become maybe a $4 or $5 card in the future. One card that's been slowly creeping up, but I think could go even higher, is Crystron Quandax. So if you're unfamiliar with why this card is going up, its effect is basically that it can synchro summon on your opponent's turn. There's not a whole lot of because you're playing it because if people are assuming at some point soon we'll have the Crystron Link monster, and what you do is you tag into Quandax. Quandax is a very good level for a lot of decks because it's level 4. You synchro summon on your opponent's turn into a Psyframe Lord Omega. For most decks, but if you're playing something like Magicians or DDDs that has dark pendulum monsters, you can synchro summon into Supreme King Clearwing on your opponent's turn and nuke their board. It's a really strong combo, and Quandax is one of those cards that doesn't have multiple prints. It only has the 1 print from Invasion Vengeance, so it is a pretty solid card to pick up, because even though it's sitting at hovering around the $4 or $5 point for an investment, this is quite a lot, but it could be quite a lot for you. But I think it's a pretty decent card to pick up because it is going to go up. There is no doubt about that. It has 1 printing. It's going to be a card people are going to want to get their hands on once we do have Needle Fiber confirmed. And overall, I feel like it's a pretty decent card to pick up for that reason. So that's why it's on this list. So the number 3 card in this list is pretty simply, it's Dimensional Barrier. Dimensional Barrier, especially the secret rare copies, are at an all-time low in terms of they're sitting at about $5. And Barrier is probably one of the best cards you can be side decking against pendulum decks, because, of course, the reason it's not seeing a ton of play right now is because the meta is Spiral, and Spirals are virtually unhindered by this card. It doesn't affect them at all, but outside of that, and it's not very good against Tricksters, but as a side deck card, looking to where we could be going, where Magicians are going to see a ton more play. This card is probably one of the best checks to that deck, because Barrier locks out a ton of things. They cannot special summon pendulum-based monsters. If you call pendulum with this, which means astrograph loops aren't going to happen. They can go into Electrum, but they can't really do a lot with it. The most under a Barrier they might be able to do is make an Electrum and then proc a double Iris's effects. It doesn't prevent it, but it does. But I don't really know that there's a whole lot they really can do under a Dimensional Barrier. As opposed to the next card, I'm going to talk about other Floodgates, where if they have Purple Poison, they can just, ram Purple Poison in and out most Floodgates. But Barrier locks them down for the entire turn. It's not, unlike something like Vanity's Emptiness, for example, that's kind of comparable to, it doesn't lock. It's not a continuous trap, so it doesn't get, wrecked by things like by removal cards such as, Cosmic Cyclone. Then another card I think is pretty decent investment, Unending Nightmare, kind of on the same lines, Dimensional Barrier. Pendulums, if they are going to see more play, Unending Nightmare is a very good card. Now, it has the same problem I mentioned earlier, like cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance and this card are, the problem they have against Pendulum-based decks is that if they have Purple Poison Magician, they can simply summon Purple Poison Magician, smack it into your monster, and if you don't have a response for that, then they can just pop the Floodgate and continue on their plays. And Pendulum Call is a card, so this isn't always as effective as you might think, but I still think it's a pretty solid Floodgate to have, and it's sitting at about the $7 price point. It's probably the worst investment, I would say, on this list, because it's sitting about $7 or $8, and it's likely to get a reprint sometime, the Megatins, at some point this year. But, you know, I don't think it's a terrible card to get your hands on, because you're not paying a ton, and, you know, it's going to be relevant relatively soon. Then the final card in this list, this is kind of a card I think, you know, you guys, if you played during Magician format early on, you'd remember this card, which is Magical Springs. This is a kind of old card. It came out in Duelist Alliance. It does a very simple effect. It seems like a lot, but you draw cards equal to the number of face-up spells and traps your opponent controls, but you discard equal to what you have. And then after that, spell and traps cards your opponent controls cannot be destroyed. So that's is really good if you use it. It's not going to always, it's going to typically at least net you 2 cards off of Magical Spring drawing wise if you're not playing a Pendulum based deck and you have no face up spells or traps. In that case, the card's going to be really solid. It's going to give you a solid +1. But the main thing is you are locking Magicians out of using cards like Wisdom Eye Magician, and the key thing is they cannot pop cards in the Pendulum Zone with Heavy Metal Foes Electrum. They cannot pop, if they typically a lot of Magician players, because the deck now, when they do use Wisdom Eye, they're more than likely going to be using it to get a low scale from deck, because Magicians have less, they have this issue now, the opposite issue they used to have, where you have more low scale, you have more high scales than low scales rather than vice versa. So most of the time when they put a Wisdom Eye down, it's going to be a 5/8 scale. So if you chain this to their Wisdom Eye, not only are you getting a +1 and drawing 2 cards, assuming you have no base-up spells and traps, you are locking them out of placing any more cards in Pendulum Zone for the rest of the turn, because they cannot destroy them, so they cannot really, there's not a whole lot they can really do. Most Magician builds don't play a lot of high-level monsters, so you basically pretty much lock them out. If they do something like go Wisdom Eye, Double Iris, there's very little they can do to follow-up play from there. They're not going to be able to Pendulum Summon, and which means you typically probably put yourself in a winning position with those 2 cards that you drew. Overall, it's sitting at about $3 right now. I think it's a pretty solid card to grab, and especially if you're playing a non-Pendulum based deck, it's really, or a deck that doesn't have a lot of face-up spells and traps. This card is incredibly solid because you're getting value out of it and you're locking them out, so getting those 2 cards drawn is really good. So anyway guys, that about comes into the video game. Are there any cards you guys think people should pick up? Let me know down in the comment section down below if there's any other cards you think that you should pick up while they're cheap now. Anyway guys, always thank you guys for watching. It's Warstorm signing out.